Now on our southern border, you have a Mexican senator. Now he's not official of the, he's not in charge of anything in the government. He's a senator, just like Lindsey Graham is free to bloviate and say whatever he wants, but that's not American policy. But still, the fact that he's going to say what I'm about to show you is eye-opening.
Yo dije, si hacemos el muro, sí lo pagamos, pero lo hacemos con el mapa de México en 1830. Este es lo que era Estados Unidos en 1830. Y esto era parte de México, no era todo México. Si ustedes pueden ver, quizás un tercio, mínimo una cuarta parte del territorio norteamericano era parte de México hasta 1846.
What do you make of that, Doug? Is that anything we should be concerned about, or is it just some Mexican member of their Senate that's saying stuff that we really don't care about?
Well, I'm sure you've been to Mexico. I have. And if you visit, this is not unusual. There is this long memory in Mexico of how we took advantage of them and grabbed all of this territory as a result of the Mexican War in 1846. In some respects, he's correct. But what people don't understand is that in that territory that he was pointed to, which became part of the United States, there were a few 100,000 people, more than half of whom were Indian tribes. And by the way, they invited the so-called Anglos to settle in northern Texas. Initially, this is the Mexican government because they wanted them to take the brunt of the Indian attacks and interventions into northern Mexico, where they would raid and steal things and so forth. Little did they know it would become Texas, but that's what happened, obviously. I think we should be very concerned in this sense that we have millions and millions and millions of Mexicans and many other Hispanics inside the United States, many of whom don't seem to feel as though they're Americans. And then we have millions that do. But the numbers that don't has jumped dramatically over the last few years. And when I say few years, I'm not just talking about the last 4 or 5. I'd go all the way back to the 90s. Sam Huntington wrote a wonderful book, and this is the last book that he wrote. It was called Who Are We? And the book opens in the first chapter with a soccer game in Los Angeles. And the soccer game, this stadium of 20 or 30,000 fills up. And it's between the United States and Mexico. And there are perhaps 500 people there rooting for America, and everybody else in the stadium is cheering for Mexico. And he essentially asks the same question you are. Is this something we should be concerned about? This was in the 1990s, Dan. This is now 2025. No one could miss the numbers of Mexican flags that we saw flying in Los Angeles recently.
Right.
And I'm not insisting that this is the beginning of a major conflict. What I'm suggesting is that we're seeing perhaps the spring rain before the flood. All societies are tested. And there are 2 ways that you can be tested. One is war. And I don't think that's likely for us because we have the advantage of being fairly isolated here in the Western Hemisphere. We can walk out of these so-called vital conflicts anytime we want with no impact on us at all. And very little impact overseas. But we can't survive the financial crisis that looms on the horizon right now very easily. And when people no longer can be subsidized, whether it's food stamps or other special privileges or gifts of cash or opportunities that are government financed and provided, when that goes away and you have millions of people inside your country who are not Americans, and make it abundantly clear that they don't want to be Americans, that they are in fact loyal to other entities, then you got a real problem. And I think we've gotten a foretaste of it in LA. It's just the beginning. How we handle these things in the months ahead, particularly as we go from this state of abundance that you and I have known throughout most of our lives to a state of scarcity. You know, what happens when everything you normally buy at the Food Lion or Winn-Dixie is no longer on the shelves? What do you do when you can't afford whatever it is that you want, whether it's a car or gasoline or anything else? I mean, we haven't had to deal with this for a long time. I vaguely remember it in the 1970s. But all of these things have to be taken into account. So I think the question is, who are we, is a very good one and a very important one. And I'm not sure at this stage that we can answer that very easily.
And before we came on the air here, you were talking to me about some other aspects of these riots in LA that you've been concerned about. The way most of the media is portraying this is that there's lots of, and that's part of it is accurate, that there's a lot of pro-immigrant views in California, and that they didn't like the way that they were handled, and they didn't like that the ICE agents came in looking like they're dressed for war, et cetera, like they're soldiers, not policemen, et cetera. But then you're suggesting that there may be others behind all these protests, more than just people and who, however legitimate, that have different agendas in there. What is your position on that?
Well, the chief of police in Los Angeles tried to make the argument that the vast majority of people involved in this activity, the destruction of private property and threatening people's lives, were in fact what he called professional anarchists. I'm sure some of that is true. And we do have evidence because we saw this in 2020. There are wealthy so-called oligarchs, people that we always talk about, Soros, who has money that goes through many, many different front organizations, but he's not the only one. And
by the way, Doug, just as you're talking here, what we're seeing on the screen there that Gary found this morning is somebody has a lot of money to buy these bionic shield masks that are handed out in mass to just protesters. That doesn't look like some sort of just grew up from the grassroots that suddenly they came out there and someone provided these. It means they had to have them to give them out. So that by itself is kind of concerning.
Oh, no, absolutely. And this is, as I said before, this is the tip of the proverbial iceberg. And I would expect these kinds of things to get progressively worse as you go through the summer and into the fall, simply because of the strain that the financial crisis is likely to impose on our society. It's this issue of societal cohesion. So there's no doubt some of that is true, but then there's something else that's concerning, and it's the fact that this chief of police in LA said, I will not cooperate, and no one in my department will cooperate with any federal authorities. Well, the chief of police, I think, is an American citizen. And if you're an American citizen and the president of the United States determines that conditions warrant the use of federal troops, I would think that you would present yourself for not just cooperation, but also to provide advice. But this is the other thing that we need to understand. Back in the early 1960s, we go back to 62, 63, 64, Los Angeles was, as I recollect, 90% white. Today, it's less than 33% white. Now, why is this important? Because there are racial divisions in this country, and those divisions can easily be exploited by the kind of people who purchase those masks. And hatred is easy to mobilize and whip up. And unfortunately, that's the other thing that I fear. The same people that provided those expensive masks, they're going to be providing other things, weapons. Sometimes those are bricks. Sometimes those are stones. I mean, I'm sure you saw the clip that was on the television from Los Angeles of this man standing there throwing bricks at passing police cars. Well, my first question is, why didn't one of the police cars stop and then try to arrest this man, or better yet, shoot him? Well, we don't shoot people. Well, I got news for you. The only way to stop looting of stores, which, by the way, we've also seen in Los Angeles again, looting and the destruction of private property, if you don't shoot someone who is doing that sort of thing, it won't stop.
Yeah, and you can just see this is right there. That's the one. That's kind of the money shot right there. That is, it's not a gun, but you could have killed somebody if that brick goes through the driver's window right there. All these are doing it. You can't use more force than is required by the police really across the country, but you have to use force when it is required. And this just emboldens these. I hesitate to even call them protesters, because these are just violent people who seem to be having a good time about attacking the police than they do about protesting whatever policies that ICE may have been doing. So I think but the problem is, though, Doug, this is a really, really chaotic and multifaceted issue that doesn't have any easy answers, because there is so much hatred on many sides of this. How do you solve that?
Well, you don't solve the hatred, but you have to stop the disorder. If you don't compel people to obey the law, if you don't make it abundantly clear that if they do certain things, they risk being shot and killed.
Doug, I want to ask you something, because it's something that just occurred to me that I remember you told me, I bet it's close to 30 years ago, that one of America's most famous generals, George Patton, came up in the ranks earlier when he was putting down protest in Washington, D.C. against a bunch of veterans. And if I recall correctly, my 30 years in the past, so maybe this isn't right, but don't I recall you saying that he did whatever it took, even though he loved the veterans, to put down the protests?
Well, he was not in charge at the time. He was a lieutenant colonel commanding a cavalry squadron. And you're talking about the bonus marchers. These were veterans who'd been promised a bonus based on their service during the First World War in Europe. The bonus was never paid. And so they decided to take to the streets. They were actually camped on the Washington Mall, up and down the mall from the Washington Monument. And the president said, we can't have this. This is anarchy inside the capital of the United States. And he directed MacArthur, who was the chief of staff, to remove them. And ultimately we did that. Now, one person was killed. I think one child was injured or killed. And that was it, which is a miracle, because there were thousands and thousands of people there. But Patton and the rest of the troops that were there didn't like it. They found it distasteful because they were sympathetic to these veterans who hadn't been paid. But that represented anarchy, a threat to law and order, a threat to the chief executive of the United States and to the law and order in our country. And so they acted. That in retrospect was pretty mild compared to what you saw in Los Angeles. If we were to resurrect MacArthur and Patton and they saw what went on there, my God, I think they'd have gone through the roof right away. And my point is simply this. At some points you have to come up with the right rules of engagement. You can't do what Pam Bondi did. She came on television. Well, we found that man that was throwing those bricks, and we're going to go search his apartment. Thank you, Attorney General. You're the same Attorney General that won't release the lists of Epstein's clients. Well done. We're so grateful to you for your failure to enforce the law in Washington. Now you want to arrest this one man. Come on, this stuff is not going to be dealt with nicely. It's not going to produce the desired outcome. And these are the things that the president is going to have to wrestle with. It's tough. All of us, you and I that served in the military, we all find the idea of being employed to restore order domestically tasteful. But if we can't do it, we have no country.
Right. That's the point that has to be made. That's why I was bringing up the Patton issue, because he's one of the most beloved American generals in our history. And yet when it came time to preserving the domestic stability, he did the distasteful because that was needed. And I think that we're in a similar situation right here. We've got to get control of this, whether it's state. I would be great if we could have the state, the local, and the federal officials working cooperatively together for the general good. But as you just pointed out, there's problems in Washington, there's problems in California, and this is a bigger issue that's going to have to be addressed.
Well, by the way, if you go back and look at the photographs that were taken at the time that this bonus march was dispersed, there's a lieutenant colonel standing next to General MacArthur as chief of staff, and that's Eisenhower, who at the time was advising him on quote unquote public relations. And then you had, of course, Patton that walks up, gets off his horse. So it's fascinating to look at the people that were involved. There were other major names. All of these people, by the way, all of these people also served on the Mexican border and wore the Mexican campaign ribbon, because the Mexican border was not a friendly place to us then either, in the 1920s and 30s. So what we've got to do is we've got to make some decisions. Are we going to tolerate all of these foreign flags on our soil? I'm tired of seeing foreign flags flown left and right inside our country as evidence for some sort of legitimate political entity. We're Americans. The last time I looked, there's one flag. That's it. I don't know why the others are out there. We put the others out for visiting dignitaries as a matter of courtesy. When a president from some country, whether it's Liberia or Mexico or Russia, we fly their flags. But otherwise, why are we seeing all of these foreign flags?
It's not a good question.
Yeah.
Well, listen, this is obviously not going away anytime soon. So we really, really appreciate you weighing in on these two really big issues that we've discussed today. And as always, we're very grateful for your time.
Hey, thank you, Dan. See you
And we
again.
appreciate you guys too. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't done that already. That helps us out more than you know. We really appreciate you guys, and we're going to continue to give you whatever's happening, because we tell you we are unintimidated and uncompromising. We will bring you the truth, even when it's tough and difficult, like what's happening here inside the United States or within NATO in Europe. Thank you very much. We'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.